Primal wilds. Winter on the edge. What do you do when the wind devours your walls and the night is attempting to murder you? No furnace, no electricity, no contemporary insulation, a cabin, a family, and a decision. Remain warm or perish. Tonight, I will demonstrate how frontier families transformed iceboxes into life, saving havens using methods so ingenious. They remain effective today from all night heat systems to moss-filled insulation, from warm stone beds to emergency measures that made the difference between dawn and darkness. I'm Jams, and this is Primal Wilds. Let's step into the deadliest nights of the American frontier and learn the thermal survival playbook that kept families alive when the temperature fell below zero and kept falling. It was 1830 in Montana in the Dakotas. Winter didn't only come in, it lingered, weighing down like iron. For weeks, the mercury dropped toward minus 50 degrees. Winds cut through cabins as if the logs were paper. Within one of those cabins resided Thomas and Sarah Morrison, two children asleep in one bed, a fire that needed to burn until morning, and an endless list of tiny choices that would determine whether this family would survive to spring. Comfort was not the point. Survival was, and the individuals who survived had systems, proven, accurate, and merciless. Rule number 1 on the frontier: your fire isn't decoration. It is life support. Families constructed huge stone fireplaces with large fireboxes. The sloping sides threw heat back into the room. The tilted back wall reflected heat onto the family, rather than letting it rise up the chimney. Dampers regulated airflow, the fire's throttle. Put it in position, and you received a clean, hot burn that drew out your fuel as far as possible. The stones on either side of the hearth were not merely decorative. They were heat batteries, absorbing heat during the time the fire was burning and giving it off hours after the flames had gone out. There were stoneworks in some cabins that reached inside the room, making a 6-hour burn into a 12-hour glow. But fire is just as good as the wood you burn. Families took months chopping and drying hardwood. Oak, hickory, maple. Wood was graded by task. Large trunks for long-term grit through the night, medium splits for consistent production, and kindling for sudden jolts or morning respawns. Seasoned wood was lighter, split at the ends, and clapped hollow when tapped. They learned these cues by memory. When it was time to load, big logs to the rear, little pieces forward. This staging process created instant fire with gradual, steady burning. Below it all was a bed of coal, the warm engine that sustained the entire system. Airflow was the key. Too much air and the fire burned itself out in a hot, short flame. Too little and smoke filled the cabin. Balancing them was the difference between burned wood and solid survival. And then the trick that made mornings possible: banking the fire. At bedtime, families stoked large hardwood logs, spread out coals evenly, sprinkled a thin layer of ash on them, and fiddled with the damper. If done properly, there would remain live coals at morning, waiting to come back to life with a breath of air and some twigs. Heat was not contained in a single location. Fire-heated stones and bricks were relocated to beds and corners, warming cold spots into warm microclimates. The same fire that warmed you to life cooked your supper. Efficiency was a decree, and when that wasn't enough, households maintained backup system small stoves, bedroom braziers, standing by to take over when the cold pushed too close. A good fire did not merely burn, it lingered. But fire was not enough to triumph. Heat had to be contained. Most cabins featured double-walled construction with a 6 to 8-inch gap between the two walls. That area was filled with insulation. Moss, particularly sphagnum, was the choice dried. It contained thousands of air spaces. Blended with animal hair fur, even down feathers, it became a solid natural insulation. Gaps between logs were filled with mud or clay that had been mixed with straw or hair, applied again and again until no air could penetrate. The floor was the other adversary. Families raised them and filled the crawl space with straw, dry leaves, and bedding. They even housed chickens down below using their body heat as a part of the system heat rises. So the roof needed protection. Builders installed bark or split wood. then moss layers, leaves, and finally thick sod heavy. Yes, but watertight and an effective thermal shield. Windows and doors were vulnerabilities. Families dangled thick blankets or furs across windows at night. Door frames were padded with strips of leather or fur. Double-door entrances were even installed in some cabins, producing a small buffer room that prevented lethal gusts from entering the main living area. Insulation wasn't a single task. Families checked it all the time, repacking moss, fixing cracks, plugging holes. One single draft would leave you with an icy bucket come morning, or a child too chilled to sleep. But the finest heater of all was the human body, if you knew how to utilize it. Clothing was not haphazard. Individuals dressed in layers, linen or wool on the bottom, wool shirts, vest, and then outerwear. Each layer retained heat. Wool was ideal since it remained warm, even if wet with perspiration. Beds were their own heaters. The fire-heated stones were covered in wool and tucked under blankets, emitting constant heat throughout the night. Families slept en masse, kids in the middle, parents on the outside, converting body heat into a shared barrier against cold straw, or feather mattresses raised bodies above the frozen ground. Some beds were curtained, providing a small heated pocket of air. Families consumed hot broth, tea, or milk before bedtime to increase their core temperature. Even digestion was incorporated into the heating strategy. A small amount of motion exercise, stretching fingers and toes, kept circulation active and frostbite at bay. Comfort was pleasant. Survival was preferable. And then nights when things didn't work out. When the fire went out at 2 in the morning and the cold outside dropped to -40 at such times, families had less than 3 hours before they could no longer live in their home. They didn't panic. They had procedures. Emergency tinder, birch bark, pine pitch, char cloth was always prepared. With skilled fingers, the fire could be rekindled before the cabin dropped below safe temperatures. If a family member slipped into hypothermia, the family moved quickly. Off with wet clothes. Skin to skin with the warmest adult, both covered in blankets and furs. Others created a human shell. Adults on the outside, kids on the inside, making a living heater until the fire came back. When the fuel got low, nothing was exempt. Furniture, books, even parts of the cabin itself could be burned. You could rebuild a chair. You couldn't rebuild a life. Some families contracted their world, pitching a blanket tent around the fire, holding the heat in a smaller space they could actually maintain. Emergency sustenance was rich and quick fat. Honey, a dram of liquor, to energize the body from the inside out. They were familiar with the symptoms of hypothermia, shivering, confusion, fumbling hands. Then in appalling silence, they were familiar with the remedy. Slow rewarming, warm liquids, no surprises. Tools were inspected daily, backup systems were tested every week. Drills were practiced until each child could do it without thinking. Out here in the wilderness, you didn't have second chances. Your plan had to succeed the first time. And here's the part that matters to us today. Winter still wins when the grid fails. Storms knock out power, heaters go silent, and suddenly, we're not so different from the Morrisons in their cabin. But the frontier left us a manual. Build a fire that lasts, trap heat with insulation, use the human body like a heater, and when everything collapses, fall back on your emergency script. These weren't just tricks. They were truths, and they're still true today. I'm Jams. This is Primal Wilds. Stay curious, stay prepared, and remember this, knowledge is heat.